I think I should be okay. Is it possible for you to point the computer towards the students so I'm not just talking to myself?
Well,
Make
you
it
are
a bit.
you are on the screen.
You will regret.
So
Okay,
you will
that's fine.
share your PowerPoint, and
Yeah.
then you can yeah. Okay. Yes. All right. So let me do this. I'll introduce the whole presentation, and you can take those few minutes to set up and okay. Then you let me know when you're ready. Okay. All right. So go ahead. Go ahead and set up. All right. Welcome. I'm glad you came. I see a lot of grade. This is good. Although you guys will, the curriculum has changed for you guys a little bit, but still, it's very valuable for you to see the presentation. You guys will be doing something similar, okay? But it's still very valuable for you guys to see the presentation. This is something that 12th grades work very hard on. There's similar elements, it's the same elements, so take this knowledge, take this information, this experience, and you can apply it to when we do the exhibition. Okay, so just a little background on what the TOK presentations are, for those of you who don't know. Basically, the presentation is based on what we call a real life situation, or RLS. And it could be a current event, but it doesn't have to be. In any case, it's an event that students have taken, and it's happened in real time, and they ask a question about it, a knowledge question. So you TOK students, you know what knowledge question is. For those of you who don't, knowledge question is basically a question about knowledge, but it's looking really at a deeper level than just the surface. So, for instance, if we're talking about a presidential election, it's not about really, a knowledge question would not really be about who's right, Democrats or Republicans or this party or that party. It's more about like, how does the media help influence our opinion on what candidate we believe is the right candidate? That would be more like a knowledge question. Okay, so it's going at a level that's deeper than the surface. Oh, I'm right. No, I'm right. And here's the reasons why. No, we're looking a little deeper than that. What the influences are. How do we know what we know about this particular topic? Okay, so the presentation is based on taking a real life situation and applying a knowledge question to that. So we're going to kind of flesh it out, turn it around, look at it from different perspectives. Then they're going to come back to that real life situation and reapply what they know to that real life situation, and maybe introduce some other related real life situations. Okay, so that's the flow of the presentation. So that's what to look for. All right. So if Sarah's ready, she can start.
Okay. So for my TOK presentation this year, I chose to look at female artists and the media. So the real life situation that I chose to use for this presentation is this interview clip of Taylor Swift, and I will play it for you quickly now.
Oh, Sarah, I don't think we have any sound on it.
Okay, sorry, give me a second. I can...
You're gonna have people who are gonna say, oh, like she just writes songs about her ex-boyfriends, and I think frankly that's a very sexist angle to take. No one says that about Ed Sheeran. No one says that about Bruno Mars.
Can you hear it now?
Okay. Yes.
Give me a second.
You're going to have people who are going to say, oh, you know, like, she just writes songs about her ex-boyfriends. And I think, frankly, that's a very sexist angle to take. No one says that about Ed Sheeran. No one says it about Bruno Mars. They're all writing songs about their exes, their current girlfriends, their love life, and no one raises a red flag there.
Did you hear that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So this is the real life situation that I chose to use for my TOK presentation. It's an interview of Taylor Swift with an Australian morning talk show.
You're going to have people who are...
The knowledge question that I came up with based on this real life situation is, to what extent does media affect how society views art? So to begin with, the connection between my real life situation and knowledge. As many of us all know, as all of us know, media plays a large role in our day-to-day lives, especially as technology has become such an important part of our lives and such a big part of our lives. Media affects us more and more. We have countless opportunities, countless amounts of information at our fingertips. And so, female artists have had a really hard time building names for themselves in the music industry throughout history due to the fact that it is a predominantly male-run world. Most producers, directors, authors, screenwriters have all been males throughout history. So females have had a very hard time creating this image and building names for themselves. And through this, they've also been scrutinized for writing songs and the songs that they write about and the information that they write about in their songs. And one of this thing is that they write about their past, present, and their current relationships. They are being called emotional due to this and told that they're looking for people's attention. So in this interview, we see that Taylor Swift talks about how she's been called out and how she's been judged for writing songs about her relationships, whereas her male counterparts, such as Ed Sheeran and Bruno Mars, who write about the same sort of stuff, are not criticized for it and are not scrutinized for it. Ed Sheeran and Bruno Mars are not the only male artists who write about their relationships. So artists such as Shawn Mendes, Justin Bieber, and countless more also write songs about their relationships. So this real life situation and my knowledge question led me to ask myself, first of all, what is media? And second of all, how does media affect our views as the consumers? So first of all, dictionary.com defines media as the means of communication as radio and television, newspapers, magazines, and the internet that reach or influence people widely. So what you can immediately pull from this definition is the fact that media is meant to influence people. Media is meant to affect people. It's meant to be seen widely by people, and it's meant to have an influence on us as the audience and as the consumers. So, as I said previously, we're exposed to countless amounts of media and countless amounts of information in our everyday life, whether it's for school, whether it's for entertainment, whether it's for research purposes or whatever. We're exposed to a lot of information. And this can be helpful, and it can also be harming. It can be harming because media creates trends. Things become popular and things go away and aren't popular anymore, and these trends change very quickly. Things can become a norm one year and the next year they're gone, or even in the matter of weeks. And so this causes us as society to want to align ourselves with those trends. We want to be a part of those trends and want to be involved in these trends. And therefore it can cause us to change our views and change our ideals to align with these trends, and so that we're a part of them. So who is Taylor Swift? She's an American singer-songwriter who's become extremely famous. Last year, she won the Artist of the Decade award from 2010 to 2020. So she's very successful. And she has had many public relationships with other high-profile celebrities. A few examples are Harry Styles, Jake Gyllenhaal, Taylor Lautner, etc. And so throughout these relationships, she's released songs, she's released albums, and media and fans have begun to speculate about who these songs were written about and who these songs were based on. For example, there's a lot of speculation and rumor that her song Back to December, which was released in 2010, is about Taylor Lautner. And there's also a lot of speculation and rumor that her song Style and Out of the Woods, both released in 2014, were written about Harry Styles. Now, the reason I use the words speculated and rumored is due to the fact that Taylor Swift has never denied she's written songs about her relationships, but she has said multiple times in interviews and in public and to media that she has a personal rule to never name names, meaning she has a personal rule to never say out loud who a song is about. And so therefore, media and fans can only speculate who these songs are about. They have no concrete proof. So how does media portray Swift? Media reports have called her clingy, they've called her needy. Some have even gone as far as saying that she only dates people to write songs about them, saying that she uses her relationships for monetization, that she gets in and out of relationships quickly so she has songs to write and has stuff to write about. So this is the first way that media has begun to portray her. And secondly, mainstream media plays and commercializes her love songs and her breakup songs because that is what an audience wants to listen to. That's what humans and the people listening to her music can relate to. And therefore, this is the image that has been built around her, the image of her as her relationships. So, but as if you look at all of her songs in general, you'll see that she has multiple songs that are about her life growing up, about her life and learning to accept herself. She grew up in a very small town. She's written songs about friendships, and while these songs are known by her fans, they're not widely known by listeners, and that's because media chooses to commercialize her songs about her relationships. So already we can see that this is the image that has been built around her, and this is the image that media has portrayed, and as consumers, this is the image that we see from the media. For example, if you Google Taylor Swift, her biography that comes up says Taylor Allison Swift is an American singer-songwriter. Her narrative songwriting, which often centers around her personal life, has received widespread critical plaudits and media coverage. And right there, you see that if you had no idea who this person was and you look her up, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see that she's been criticized for writing about her relationships. And so this is the image that has been built around her. So, but how does media portray other female artists? Artists such as Lady Gaga and Madonna have been told they write too explicitly and have been criticized by media. In an interview, Lady Gaga was asked about wearing provocative clothes and writing explicit lyrics, and she said, "Because I'm a female and I make pop music, you're judgmental and say it's distracting. I'm just a rock star." She speaks about how males are allowed to use provocative dances in their background dances, backup dances, and whereas she believes that she gets criticized for doing that in her own music videos. She also says that male artists have the liberty to talk about women however they want and are praised for their writing skills in music. So it has been said that women are emotional, they write songs about their relationships and about their past, and this is true, but as I said in the beginning, artists such as Justin Bieber, Shawn Mendes, Ed Sheeran, they all write songs about their relationships, so that claim doesn't really stand. The blame can also be put on Taylor Swift for keeping her relationship too public. So also, how are males shown in the media? This has become a very big thing. Last week, Vogue released their December cover, and Harry Styles is the first male artist to be solo on this cover. And he was photographed in a dress, and this has been taken both ways. People have praised him for it, saying that he has become the face of gender-neutral clothing, breaking gender stereotypes and gender constructs that clothe are gendered, while others have said that he criticized him for not being manly enough and saying that men need to be manly, men cannot wear feminine clothes, feminine meaning soft or, etc. So this is how media has started to portray males, has been critical of them and what they wear when they want to express themselves. In conclusion, media affects us all largely and affects us in many different ways. We see that it's built an image and it built a image around Taylor Swift that portrays her as needy and emotional and who only writes songs about her relationships, and men have been criticized for wearing clothing that may not be exactly masculine. it is our job as consumers to discern and decide what media we are going to trust and take at face value, and what media we need to look farther into and we need to research farther into so we can understand and for ourselves. So widely, I think that media does affect people and the way they are viewed, especially artists and female artists, very widely. Thank you.
We can open up the floor to questions. So if anybody has a question, you can ask Sarah.
Mr. Richards, I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
Okay. Oh, yes. I just said that the floor is open for questions for you to take. So if anybody has any questions, they can ask you. Questions? Anybody? Alright, I have a question, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you come across any cases where maybe males are unjustly treated by the media for things that they do, maybe not related to relationships, but
I think I haven't seen any specifically. With my research, I did look that up. Men are often scrutinized more for, I think, the way that they act in public or the way that they act in songs, but not necessarily about what they write about. And perhaps nowadays it is becoming more closely looked at, and what you write about in your music and express through your music is more criticized. But mainly through the research that I've done, I've only seen or mostly seen female artists being criticized for what they specifically write about.
okay. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Nice job, Sarah. Thank you. So,
my presentation is based on the area of knowledge of ethics, and my title is The Hierarchies of Life. And first of all, I'll introduce my real-life situation and how that leads to my knowledge question. So, my real-life situation came from a quote by Gary L. Franchoni. He is a university professor, also the author of the book Eat Like You Care. And this is the quote from him. He said that just as we reject racism, sexism, ageism, and heterosexism, we reject speciesism. The species of a sentient being is no more reason to deny the protection of this basic right than race, sex, age, or sexual orientation is a reason to deny membership in human moral community to other humans. So quickly summarize the two underlying ideas in the quote. First, interspecies discrimination is at the same level with discrimination in human society when we're talking about morality. And second, members of every species deserve equitable moral treatment. So, if we step back from this stance and look at the opposite side, one of the major criticism is that there are situations where species discrimination is justifiable, while discriminations within humans are not. For example, in medical experiments that could potentially save the lives of 1,000 people, it would be justified to use mice but not humans. So my question is, can we really find a systematic approach, a theory to justify this conclusion while avoiding being in the biased perspective of subjectivity of human beings? So that leads to my knowledge question of using what methods can we determine the moral hierarchies of different species, if any. Okay, so before I start, I will introduce the definition of some of the keywords. First, moral hierarchy, I define it as the hierarchies according to which the subject deserve different level of moral consideration. And moral consideration is to give careful thoughts to proper conduct. And speciesism is assigning treatments, attitudes, values, and rights, etc. to individuals solely based on their species. And methods are methodologies including ethical theories and ways of knowing. Okay, so this is how the discussion will progress. It's mainly separated into 3 sections with 4 subsections, and each argument is based on an ethical theory, virtue ethics, and utilitarianism, and they are linked to 2 of ways of knowing respectively. Okay. So this is the first argument based on the theory of virtue ethics. So what virtue ethics is asking is that it requires people to prioritize actions based on how they conform to the principle of being a virtuous individual. For example, qualities like compassion, respect, and honesty that are considered as virtues are the core idea of this theory, and actions that conform to those qualities will be prioritized over those that don't. So the claim here is that moral hierarchies of species are not justified in all situations. And how we come to that conclusion is very straightforward. There's only one premise, is that moral hierarchization of species is not compassionate nor fair. It violates the virtues of fairness, compassion, consistency, integrity, etc. And that's why it is not justified using this theory. And the biggest counterclaim that we would encounter here is that although there is a reasonable logical flow that we come to the conclusion, there is an element of faith involved, because no one has ever came up with a clear list of what being virtuous is. So we cannot have a black and white definition of where should we draw a line. So there will still be gray areas, and that's why using this theory we cannot really create a universal, systematic, a complete approach of how to generate solutions to issues regarding species and discrimination. And apart from subjectivity of faith, another major counterclaim is that there are potentially justifiable situations where we treat species differently and it can still be considered as a virtuous individual. For example, 2 situations. Lives of 10 monkeys in exchange for 1 human, or 10 humans in exchange for 1 human. If we agree that there's an absolute equality between species, there's no hierarchy at all, then these 2 situations should be all justified. So we cannot really prioritize any of these over the other. But somehow it doesn't look quite right. So my question is, can we justify that sacrificing animals but not humans is a reasonable action in some situations while still avoiding being subjective as a human? It's not, oh, we can kill animal but not human because we're human and that's how we feel. What we are looking for is a systematic approach to theory that can be applied universally. So on that stance, we come to the second argument, based on the theory of utilitarianism, concerning the ways of knowing reason and sense perception. So utilitarianism is a theory that requires people to find solutions or decision actions that can bring the most good. And my claim here is that moral hierarchy species are justifiably determined by their ability to make goods. And goods are defined as the positive qualities like happiness and joy and comfort. And here in this case, it can be measured in two forms. One, physical goods, and then spiritual goods. So physical goods are those like physical comfort by avoiding physical pain. And spiritual goods, for example, when you're listening to music or reading a novel, you feel that pleasure that is not manifested in a physical level, but in a spiritual level, and that is physical good. So we can basically summarize, we can basically put all the subject into three categories and put them into a pyramid. From top to bottom are those who are able to generate both forms of good, and then those who are able to generate only physical good. And at the bottom is the species that can generate neither of them. And the level of moral consideration that we give to each species go down. They decrease as we go down the pyramid. And within each category, the moral consideration is dependent on effectiveness of the species in terms of generating this good. For example, both monkeys and humans would fall on the top category because these two species can experience both physical pleasure and spiritual pleasure. However, the spiritual pleasure of monkeys or chimpanzees are limited until the point of socializing and grooming with each other, while humans can go further. We can read novels, we can listen to music, we can make debate, and we can appreciate artwork. And that's why humans deserve a higher level of moral consideration than monkeys in this case, because this species is able to generate more spiritual good. So generally, it worth more consideration than monkeys. And this claim also has its limitation. And first is very obvious, is our biased perspective. So we can only look at it from a human's perspective, which means that we cannot determine for sure the ability to generate physical and spiritual good of other species. So the greater the gap of species there is, the harder for us to empathize with another group of members. For example, it is easier to empathize with another human being than to empathize with the feeling of a chimpanzee. And it's easier to empathize with a chimpanzee than to empathize with a mosquito. So yeah, that's the idea. And unfortunately, as we go down the pyramid, as we enter into the zone where we classify all those species that deserve less and less moral consideration, the gaps between species increases. So that is a limitation because we cannot know for sure the reliability of our sense perception, whether we see this rabbit is suffering more than that insect. We cannot really test if that is reliable. So that is the first limitation. And the second one is exceptions in species. So these are sometimes referred as marginal cases. For example, 99% of human beings would fall on the top of the pyramid. But there are exceptions, like vegetative patients. They can feel neither physical suffering or spiritual pleasure. So they would go down to the bottom of the pyramid. And that's when we would face a difficulty of having a complete theory, because wherever we go, there's always that gray area where things are not completely black and white. And it could be argued that we can look from another perspective. So instead of looking from the point of view of species, we can look at individuals. However, that would deviate from the discussion of whether hierarchies among species is justified. So that's why we're going to stop there and keep it as a limitation to this argument. So then we come to the final conclusion, that moral hierarchies of species is justifiably determined by their ability to bring goods. However, limitation of humans' ability to measure the subjective experience of other species and marginal cases should be noted. And going back into the real-life situation, the conclusion we get here is that there are justified moral hierarchies of species because they are capable of bringing different level of goods. However, whether this can be brought up to the same level with discrimination within human society, like discrimination based on skin color or on gender, still needs further exploration and discussion. But this conclusion can also be useful in other situations, like those where exploitation of non-human animals are unavoidable. For example, for medical experiments, for food, or for shelter, where food resource is limited, or where people have no choice but to kill animals for sort of materialistic needs. When these situations are unavoidable, animals at the bottom of the pyramid should be chosen over those from the top. So that is how this conclusion can be applied to a variety of real-life situations. So that is the end of my presentation.
Questions? Sorry. Questions for Nina? Okay, I have some questions. You mentioned the utilitarian approach. My question is, how can you justify the utilitarian approach? So in other words, why is the greatest good the greatest principle? Right?
Because that is how this theory is defined at the first place. So, utilitarian, basically what it means is to bring, like, utility is the core idea. So, the most straightforward way of defining utility is like positive qualities and goods. For example, and this is pretty universal. I'm pretty sure that on this earth, all of the organisms wouldn't classify physical suffering as a form of goods. So it's pretty universal that how we acknowledge the term goods. And that is how this theory is based.
Okay. So how would you answer if there was a tyrant, let's say, who said, well, I deserve the best of everything and nobody else is as worthy as me. Why would that person be wrong?
Because sacrificing the freedom and rights and welfare of thousands of people to satisfy the so-called desire of one person, it's basically it's not on an equal term. It's not. There's no such equation because this theory doesn't encourage subjectivity. So what we're talking about here is the pleasure of 1,000 people and the pleasure of one person. So obviously, the first group would be prioritized than that single individual.
Okay.
I also have a question. So, for the utilitarianism, do you mean that is for human society, or do you include other species as well?
So, the whole presentation basically boils down to the idea of all species. So, what I am exploring is whether discriminations between species, like discrimination based on biological traits that separate us as different species, like some organisms they walk, some organisms they fly and swim, whether that discrimination based on those biological traits is morally important as those in human society, like skin color or sexuality. So in this context, yes, it's facing to all species. So for example, species like a tree that is not able to experience both neither physical suffering, as far as we know scientifically, and spiritual pleasure, then that would go down to the bottom of the pyramid. So compare with like rabbits who is able to experience physical pain, then a tree deserves more consideration than a rabbit does. That's the idea.
I just kind of thought about this question. What do you think it means of concerning spirituality of a thing that one can assume that it's existing in this world? And how would there be any difference if we just consider human as just a species that is not human itself?
That's not what.
If we just think human as a species that just coexists with the other species in the world, and what if it's not a human but something else? Would there be any difference in concerning the spirituality of a thing that one can assume to be existing in this world?
So I define spirituality as those things that doesn't have a physical manifesto. For example, if you're cut by a knife and you're bleeding, then it's obvious because it has a physical expression that you can see that this person's organism is bleeding, and you can tell that the organism is suffering. But spirituality is, for example, when you're reading Shakespeare and you feel like you appreciate this artistic beauty that cannot really be touched or sensed by your eyes. So that is how we define spirituality. Does that answer the question? Sorry. Does it answer the question?
Okay.
Right. Well, it's 3:30. You guys are itching to go. I guess we'll close. Okay, so thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Again, this is, we'll also, we'll go on next Monday, first period next Monday, and then probably next Thursday too. Okay, so you're welcome to come to those if you like. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Nice to have you. Have a nice day.
大概有1次有，真的很